So right here is an example of some code someone might write to create a drawing tool here on Scratch. Let's test it out and see how it looks. I start by clicking the green flag, and according to my code, as soon as I click the green flag, the pen size is set to 1, which is about as small as it can go and still be visible. And then it goes into a forever loop where it continuously changes the color and the size. First, it changes the color forward by 5, and makes the pen larger by 1, and it does that 10 times in a row. And then it starts changing the color back the way it started and shrinking the pen back down. So that makes an interesting line, but I want to now take this to the next level. So I'm going to clear this, and I'd like to show you what you can do with a block that comes on Scratch called clone. Right in the bottom of the control section, there are 3 blocks that have to do with creating a clone. The middle one here says create clone of myself. The myself in that sentence is your sprite. So in this case, it's the tool. So I'm going to place this block inside my conditional statement. So the pen is going to go down, but it's also going to be constantly creating clones. The clones aren't going to do anything until I tell them where to go. So this block is an event block that says when I start as a clone, and it tells the clones of my tool what to do when they're created. So this is really up to me. There's a lot of different things that I could do right now. I'm going to start out by creating a loop that tells my cloned tool to just sort of head off in a random direction. So I'm going to tell it to point in a direction and set that direction to something random. Now, the range that I put in here, the numbers that it goes between, will decide just how random it's going to be. I think what I'm going to do is set my range from 0 to 180, which means it's always going to head off to one side, but it could head off up on that side or down on that side or in the middle on that side. And as it's pointing in that direction, I'm also going to tell it to move a certain number of steps, and it's going to repeat this. So it's going to keep on picking a random direction to point in, and it's going to take 10 steps, and it's going to do that over and over again. Let's have it do that about 40 times. After it's done this sequence, I actually want that clone to disappear, and I'll explain why in just a minute. So let's hit the green flag, see what my line does now. So that makes a very different looking piece of artwork. I'm still drawing, but as I draw my main line is sending off a bunch of other lines off to the right side of my screen. If I change this range right here and add in a negative 180 on this side, and let's try changing the steps to a smaller number. Now you'll see that the lines that it's sending off don't travel quite as far, and now they're traveling in every direction, up, down, left, and right. Now I can make my clone very different from my original tool by changing what the code says when it starts. For instance, maybe I don't want my clone to keep changing its color. So I think I'm going to come down here and set the color of my clone to black and the size of my clone to 1. So now my main line is still colorful, but the lines that it creates with its clones are thin and black. Now, the reason it's so important to have this delete this clone block is that your program will only create a certain number of clones before it kind of quits trying to keep track of the number of things that are happening on your screen all at once. So after it repeats this 40 times, I want to make sure I tell it to delete. so that it can start creating other clones in the future. Also important to know that you never really want to tell your clone to try to create clones. If you kind of imagine in your head what would happen, the clone that you create would create a clone, and that clone from the first clone would create its own clone. And that clone would be creating more clones. And really quickly, your Scratch program would kind of run out of the power to keep track of all of that, and it would just sort of freeze up. So never make a clone create a clone. It's a recipe for disaster.